Well, hello. Thanks for joining me on this Demi Daily Deep Dive with your man, DBJ. Um, thanks for joining me, waiting in. I'm not sure who you are, but please send any and all comments. I'll answer them. But today is Third Pillar Thursday, one of my passions, one of the things that really drives me or is driving me to write and publicize information on the third pillar of adventuring. And of course, that is exploration. Um, Today's subject is going to be about rooftop running, but I thought I'd give a little bit of a for newbies, wanted to give a little bit of an explanation on what do I define as exploration in role-playing games, and even especially uh, the world's greatest role-playing game, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. All right, so I define exploration as combining the elements of investigation and knowledge, puzzles, traps, layers, and hazards and obstacles. So, you can use the environment for investigation to reveal details about your setting, for your players to uncover whether it's objects or knowledge or individuals in the environment that will help them succeed on whatever quests they're on. So, it could be discovering secret doors. It could be uncovering a map, finding an NPC that could lead them through a dangerous woodland, anything like that. Puzzles. The environment can act as a puzzle without needing a specific answer for the puzzle. So unlike the puzzles that you can find in many books, you can just type online and look up different types of puzzles and riddles that only have one answer. The environment is a puzzle that you as the game master may not be privy to the answer. That's why you put it in your player's hands. So puzzle could be trying to figure out how the safest way to scale a cliff, the best way to go through a dangerous sea filled with whirlpools and dangerous storms. It could be crossing a desert. It could be navigating a narrow rocky valley with dangerous rocks overhead. It could be not making any noise to prevent an avalanche, which is a possibility, or crossing a frozen lake or something like that. I also said call them traps because the environment can be a trap, such as I just mentioned before, the ice cracking, when you're walking across a frozen lake, dodging a landslide. It could be not getting hit by lightning, out fighting enemies out in the rain. It could be navigating through smoke and not falling into a pit, anything like that, right? And it could act as a lair. Now, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons did a great thing by creating the lair actions for creatures. But it's my contention that I feel the lair actions for creatures could have been separated and divorced from those specific creatures, and just create a bunch of layers or options for layers so you can create your own and then slap them on top of a creature. Well, since they didn't do it, I thought I would do it. So the environment can act as a layer, and it doesn't necessarily have to act in the self-interest of the creatures or NPCs that the player characters come across. So whether that layer is a volcanic cave that could drop rocks and spew lava on someone, or send up hot steam, or whether it's a dense wood and the player characters have a hard time navigating around it, but the enemy is able to slip and dive and flow through the woods very easily, or something like that. the environment can act as a layer if that creature or NPC is adapted to that region. And that doesn't always have to be the case, right? If the player characters are chasing a horde of orcs that are trying to escape and they both stumble into the Arctic, deep Arctic in a blizzard, it doesn't mean that the orcs are automatically adapted. It could affect them just as heavily as the player characters. So, but let's get back to the specifics of what I thought I'd talk about, which is roof running. Um, Rooftop running in RPGs. Um, all you have to do is just think of parkour, free running, Assassin's Creed, which is one of the most any version of Assassin's Creed has some of the most visually stimulating roof running techniques ever. And of course, there is a filmmaker, a gentleman that used roof running um, in a live with the stunt people using a camera, his little GoPro. You got to get online. You got to look up YouTube videos of it. It's awesome. But how do we use it? Because writing the cinematic environments, the first word is cinematic. So you want that high action. So the first part of being cinematic is you have to have a little creative license when you allow your players to do cinematic actions. So it's not how they perform an action, but the results of that performance. So for example, if a player says, well, I'm going to run across the roof and jump to the other side, do a tumble roll, come up with my sword and stab the bad guy. If it's just a matter of making a 30-foot movement and the jump is just an athletics check, let them look as flashy as they want. All it is just an athletics check to get to the other side, right? If they're balancing on a thin outcrop on a roof and they want to slide down a rope and they need an acrobatics check, and they say, well, I'm going to slide down the rope with my acrobatics check. I'm going to wrap my cloak around it and slide down. And then when I let go, I'm going to land on my horse and ride away. And if you're only going to ask for just one roll, let them be cool about doing it. You know, unless they're really going out of hand with it. Just let the action happen. But rooftop running, what can we do? What kind of hazards, what kind of cool things can we do with rooftops? Well, if we talk, and mind you, rooftop running spans every setting. So we don't have to necessarily talk medieval. There's tons of rooftop runnings in sci-fi and modern age games. Rooftops can be spread to other things like running along the thin membrane of a Zeppelin or running on the wing of a plane. Basically, what I'm talking about are a ton of little flat and angled areas that players can run and jump to, and they're separated by other things. I suppose the broken ice in an Arctic region could kind of represent the same thing. You have a bunch of these little islands of flat possibilities or angled hazards, and they can jump from one to the other and use them to their advantage or disadvantage. All right, so let's get, oh, wow, my face. Well, okay. Rooftop running, the basics. You got yourself a flat area, and there will come a point where they have to run and jump across streets, alleys, partitions. So in those cases, you can just set up athletics check, come up with some DC levels, 10, 12, 15, what have you. A good rule of thumb, which doesn't necessarily mean it makes sense in a reality, but a practical sense, you can use this. So how far is the alley? Is it 10 feet? Just put a DC of 10 on it. If it's 15 feet across, put a DC of 15 on it. Now, if a street has a width of 25, 30 feet, okay, then you're saying, well, my players aren't going to be able to jump across that. If I put a DC of 30, no one's ever going to make that. Well, if a human being can't jump 30 feet, well, that makes perfect sense. So how do you arrange for that? Well, some of your players, your tabaxis, your maybe centaurs, your player characters that are monks and rogues, or have magical items or spells that allow them to a long stride, to jump, to go far. This will absolutely benefit them. And so you might want to just say, okay, well, how far can you jump? Subtract that from the distance. So if you want to blend more of that Assassin's Creed, jumping far, 30-foot, 35-foot jumps, what you could do is allow your players to subtract from the distance using some kind of metric. So the metric could be subtract your strength from the distance. So if they have a strength of 15 and they want to jump a 30-foot gap, well, it's 30 feet minus the 15, which would be, 15 left. Now, of course, if you use a different metric, of course, here in the States, we use feet and inches and all that kind of crap. But if you're using meters, same thing applies. If you want to use that same metric, you can allow players to add their proficiency bonus, maybe, or use some form of their athletics or acrobatics skill total. So if they have a total of like 7, they can subtract 7 feet from it or something like that. So the first major thing is running and jumping. So you're going to have them making long jumps, and you have some athletics checks when they do this. Now, when they start making these long jumps and they miss it, you don't want this to be a circus of people just running and falling and smacking their face on the ground. There's a possibility of tripping and falling, hanging by your fingertips, that kind of thing. So I've mentioned before in videos about how you can do the yes and the no but, sort of yes but and the no and kind of thing. So in my own head canon, I use the +5 -5 range. So maybe if a player misses a roll or makes a roll, but it's within 4 points of what they need, maybe they do make it across to the other side, but they're hanging by their fingertips. So, for example, the DC to jump across this roof is a 12, and they roll anywhere from 8 to 16. So if they miss it, but they don't miss it by more than 5, then they make it across, but maybe they're just stunned for 1 round. Like they run across, they jump, and they slam on their abdomen instead, and they're just stunned. Or they make the roll, but they don't make a really good roll, right? They roll 12, the DC's 12, but they roll a 14. You're like, well, okay, you make it across, but you barely miss it, and you're holding on by your fingertips. You can scramble up, but you're effectively prone until you take your move action and scramble up onto the rooftop and keep on going. Hey, but if you rolled over 5 or 5 or more, you need a 12, you roll a 17, you jump, you roll on the other side. I mean, you do tumble roll on the other side, you keep on going as if you never stopped. You can do something like that. You don't have to do that every time. That's a lot of like math and maybe a lot of rolls and head additions and things, but that's just an example. But along with long jumps, you have yourself jumping up and jumping down. Now, there are measurements for jumping up, and I believe it's like your distance you can jump up plus, I think it's 3 feet, which counts for your arm length, plus half your height or something like that. There's some kind of metric or whatever. Again, you don't, as a game master, you don't have to use those metrics, but you should come up with a metric to allow players to jump who have the ability to jump up high. And remember, it doesn't necessarily mean jumping up and landing on your feet. You could jump up and grab something with your hands and then do a climbing maneuver after that. So you can give players the option about doing that. Now, jumping down, here's another thing. There is falling damage. So if every 10 feet you fall, you take 1d6 bludgeoning damage. But we want this to be cinematic. So again, maybe allowing players to subtract their jumping distance from their falling damage if they're choosing to descend, meaning like they're going to jump down 2 stories, land, do a tumble roll, and then keep on getting up. So if they can jump 15 feet or 22 feet and they're falling on purpose, right? They haven't been pushed over an edge and they're falling on purpose, I would subtract their falling. Now, of course, there are um, race, there are class options for like the monk, I believe the rogue, and some others that allow them the ability to survive a fall. So that they don't feel insignificant, you might want to tack this on there if you want this to be more Assassin's Creed like, but you don't have to do that. But again, I would give some leeway for those who are voluntarily jumping down, which is why people who are free runners and parkouristas are able to jump and roll and tumble and those kind of things. Now, you might want to, for those that are armored, there are certain armors give them disadvantage on stealth checks. I would just blend that over and say, hey, if you have a disadvantage, if you're in armor and it gives you a disadvantage on a stealth check, it also gives you a disadvantage on maybe an athletics or an acrobatics check or something like that. That way you don't have to like keep page flipping. You just say, hey, if your armor gives you disadvantage, you have disadvantage on these particular stunts. Also, there's the possibility that people will be using spells, things like that. So yeah, I'd allow that to happen. Now, also with roof running, as I mentioned before about being pushed and shoved, here's the thing where you can add in an extra element for your adversaries and your PCs to take advantage of if you're going to have a battle on rooftops, right? So there is a shove action. So you roll to hit. If you hit, it's strength check, strength versus strength, and the winner or the protagonist, the person trying to shove, either moves them 5 feet or knocks the person prone. Well, if you're fighting on rooftops, a 5-foot move could push somebody off the edge. So using a spear or a pole arm which has some reach, or your rogue who wants to sneak attack, maybe the rogue wants to say, okay, while the paladin's fighting the orc or the assassin or what have you, I'm going to sneak around. And when the paladin goes to strike him, I'm just going to stand behind his legs so he falls over or something and then falls off the roof. Or I'm going to sneak attack, grab him by the neck, and then instead of just stabbing him, I'm just going to throw him off the roof. Now, the cool thing about throwing somebody off of a roof, knocking them down, is the fact that it may not be that you need to kill them. Maybe you just need to get them out the way. So if they make a 30-foot fall down to the street, now they have to scramble find some steps or a ladder or climb up. While the players can just, start running across rooftops to get away, especially if they're guards or the guards are innocent in this and they just think the players are criminals and the players are not, or maybe the players are criminals, but they don't want to harm, the people that they're attacking, right? They're just innocent bystanders. They're just doing their job. But we can add even more things on the rooftop running, right? So what about angled roofs, right? The ones with shingles, whether they're ceramic or something, and you have people fighting, and you have the peaked rooftop where the players can run across the upper edge or the upper ridge and making like acrobatics checks to remain on that upper ridge and trying to maintain their balance while they're fighting the enemy. Is a really cool thing, because maybe a very acrobatic player leads enemies onto the rooftop. Now, if the enemies, if they're being followed by 6 people, that narrow ridge will limit how many enemies can attack them, because they need to be on that one thin line, and then they could just make this they can fight them one at a time, kicking each one or hitting each one at a time and making them slide down the roof. So you could do that. And of course, sliding down the roof means maybe they might hold on to the edge when they get to the edge of the roof. Maybe you ramp up the difficulty. Maybe you just add 5 to all the DCs or what have you. But anyway, really cool. You could have staying at roofs. You can add in a ton of other things, whether it's rooftop laundry lines, which can act as like a visual barrier, but it's not a physical barrier, because arrows and gunshots can go through um, jeans and towels and blankets and sheets that are being hung up out to dry. You can have cover, whether it's little ledges or barriers or um, smokestacks, chimneys, and use those as cover. Players can duck and hide behind them, which is a gunfight or people shooting arrows and crossbows and things, especially for your players that are either shorter or not as fast or not as agile running across rooftops. You have yourself your dilapidated buildings. So there's a chance that you can run across a rooftop to an abandoned building or a building that was burnt out and accidentally fall through. The same thing goes for those glass skylights that you always have to have a player or an adversary tackle another one, and then they fall through the glass. Now, again, something we use at in the cinematic environments from Critical Hit Publishing that we use is something called even the odds. And when you even the odds, what you do is just pick up any die, you roll it. If you get an even result, you're fine. If you get an odd result, too bad, you're probably going to suffer something. Same thing could be going across a dilapidated building. So is the roof going to collapse? You as the game master, dungeon master, you don't have to decide that. Leave it in the hands of the players. Have them roll a die. If they roll an odd result, sorry, the rooftop's probably going to shatter underneath you. Again, dex saving throws to keep from falling, maybe strength saving throws to hold on by your fingertips when the roof collapses, maybe some kind of investigation check, or some kind of knowledge that this area is dangerous, and push an enemy or fight an enemy on top of a glass roof or the roof of a garden, or greenhouse. I'm sorry, roof of a greenhouse, or those skylights, and doing that one action that shatters the glass or shatters something below the feet of an adversary, or using a grapple action to tackle somebody onto one, something like that. Anyway, you can have a lot of fun with those. Of course, you can always add in the weather. Any meteorological effect can always add some complications on any kind of environmental obstacles you want to put in your player's way. So fog, torrential rain, snow, even reflected bright light could always change things, make rooftops slick, limit visibility ranges. Thunderstorms can hamper vision. High winds from storms like hurricanes or tornadoes, or derechos can limit ranged attacks. Those kind of things. Man, you could just add in so many elements to rooftop running, as well as the fact that you can alter the elevation. So before I was talking about ascending and descending levels, you can alter the distances people drop. You can have angles. You can have multiple separations. So you can have distances between two objects, and you can even have distances down and then distances in separation. So the player characters have to jump and then both go across an expanse and then drop down, which can be combined together into one roll. Or you can actually use that as like, okay, do they make the expanse, and do they suffer any damage from the drop down? Again, you can make that a very complicated metric, but I would suggest that if you really want to make an Assassin's Creed style Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition game, or actually Dungeons and Dragons any game, or any modern game, or any sci-fi game, agree to come up with a way to do those calculations, and do it before the game. Make that a session 0, right? If you're going to talk about Assassin's Creed, that comes up in session 0. Just tell everybody, listen, you're going to need to know you're standing and running long jumps. You're standing and running high jumps. Your metric for measuring your drop downs. Your metric for your athletics and or acrobatics checks, whether you're using like a strength or a dexterity type of metric, and then go from there. Then you're already done. Lastly, rooftops also offer an opportunity to have multi levels of pursuit, because I love chases, and chases are kind of difficult to do in role-playing games. But you can absolutely have a chase with those that are running along the same levels as the player. So you could have your your free running, your parkour, running from roof to roof, and enemies chasing them down. And some of them will end up making failed rolls, or allies will make failed rolls and do the PC stop and help their dwarven friend who couldn't make the jump, but he's hanging by his fingertips. Or do they keep running and the dwarf decides to drop the 30 feet down to the street level and run down the alleyways, because you can have enemies in the alleys as well who are trying to track the PCs. Maybe there's a captain of the guard and they're issuing orders, and some of the guards on the roof, some of the guards are running up the stairs inside of buildings, others are climbing up ladders or fire escapes to get to the rooftops, while guards on horses or police cars or hover cars are trying to fly around to go after the PCs that are on the rooftops, trying to escape. So you could absolutely complicate those things, having a bunch of stealth checks or deception checks, hiding and running with the adversaries, making perception and investigation checks to kind of guesstimate which direction they're going to go. And also, of course, with rooftop running, you just think of any classic action movie or detective noir movie or something. You also have, with the rooftop, there's a building they're running on. Can they go inside of the buildings? And, of course, the answer to that, for the most part, unless it's a heavily modern or sci-fi game where the players are unable to gain entry to the buildings easily, like through bulletproof glass or clear duralloy ultimatum metal or something like that. Players can crash through windows, jump down on balconies, and run through people's homes. Bad guys can break down people's doors and push past innocent people who are just hanging out in their own homes, cooking dinner, just to run out onto a fire escape or balcony to try to shoot at the player characters, things like that. The Bourne ultimatum comes to mind when he's roof running, jumps from the roof to protect his girlfriend, protect his girlfriend, and he jumps from one roof down to across an expanse, down to the balcony of another roof, busts through the glass, rolls, jumps up, and gets ready to fight and picks up a pencil or something, stabs somebody in the throat. So anyway, rooftop running can have a lot of action in it. You can add a lot of details. Now, as I come to the end of this, because I can't forget rooftop running. You got to have your flying adversaries too. Some of your PCs will be able to fly too. A Tensor's floating disc, wings of flying spell, Aarakocra, any other kind of thing, levitation spells. So that adds in yet another element into rooftop running. And yes, your flyers may have quite a bit of an advantage, unless, of course, your player characters decide to go inside of buildings, in which case your flying beings such as harpies or manticores or wyverns or giant eagles or griffins may not be able to enter into those dwellings. Again, GM or DM adjudication on that fact. If something has a 25-foot wingspan, they may not be able to go down a narrow alley, which could benefit the enemy if the player characters have a wingspan, or can benefit the player characters if they decide that that's not the place to go. And of course, all this should be in the player's hands. Let them decide. Hey, I can run across the rooftops, not a problem. I can really get out of here, but those darn gargoyles are probably going to get me. Instead, I'm going to try to jump down into the alleyway or jump from balcony to balcony, because now those gargoyles cannot get to me. So anyway, I you know me, I've been going on and on and on. If anybody has any questions or comments about using rooftop running in your game, just throw them in the chat. I'll answer them. I'll be on here for a little while, but I just wanted to say that using the third pillar does not necessarily mean that third pillar of exploration does not necessarily mean it has to be a natural environment. It is any environment you use. So rooftop running is an absolutely excellent way of adding in that third pillar. So whether it's PCs jumping down, climbing up, angled roofs, rain, snow, fog, jumping down into alleys, running across dilapidated buildings or burnout buildings, skylights, all of those things, you can absolutely use them. My suggestion is, if you want to run an Assassin's Creed styled city adventure in session 0, or not even session 0, even if you have an ongoing campaign and you're like, you know what, I want to do a city styled adventure, and I want it to be like Assassin's Creed. Pause before a game starts or at the end of a game. Get all your measurements from your players. You're standing and running long jumps, standing and running high jumps. Come up with a way to measure how players are able to jump down, so you can have those like 10 foot, 20 foot, 30 foot, or drops to the ground and tumble rolls. So come up with that kind of measurement and metric, as well as coming up with how are you going to adjudicate your running and jumping versus the balance activity. So if the players have to balance across a narrow ledge or maybe a ladder, there's a ladder nearby, and the player says, well, I'm going to take the ladder and stretch it across this expanse on this alleyway and then balance my way across the rungs of the ladder to get to the other side and then knock the ladder down. Hell yeah, absolutely let people do that. If the enemy tries to do that and the player says, okay, well, if the enemy tries to follow, I'm going to shatter the ladder with my axe. Of course you want them to do that. That just sounds awesome, just the image of that. And of course, lastly, take a look at the shove rules, the knockdown rules. There's a number of creatures that can hit something and knock it down. Of course, there's the shove rules where you hit them and you make your strength checks, and if you win, you get to shove them 5 feet or knock them prone. Excellent tactic to use on a rooftop, even if the person gets shoved off of a roof and doesn't die. Maybe the idea is you don't need them to die, you just need to get them the hell out your way. All of those are great things to use for roof running tactics in your game. But I will end this with a little bit of my sales pitch, because I always have to end it with a little sales pitch, at which point anyone who watches the video can turn off. But my sales pitch is that I, of course, have been working on the cinematic environs. I have a number of them. Arctic, Mountain Eye. We at Critical Hit Publishing, and the cinematic environs being my brainchild, have Arctic regions, mountains, blasted lands, aquatic realms, desert wastes. So in those regions, aerial reaches, we even have a book on all about survival. So in those regions, you can kind of reskin roof running, especially if, let's say, you're in a desert region, but you have these tall plateaus of rock, and the player characters and adversaries can jump from rocky plateau to rocky plateau. The same things apply as far as jumping distances, making those acrobatics checks, scrambling up and down rocky plateaus. You have crumbling rock. Like I said, we use a thing called even the odds. you can use all those techniques for those as well. So, but I am writing a book called Cityscapes, and Cityscapes is all about on the fly creating a random city, random elements in your city, and absolutely in this will be roof running. All the things I talked about, plus more, plus some very easy to use random rules for that. And lastly, for the roof running, there will be a randomized table. Well, what will the randomized table be for? Well, I'm going to tell you. The randomized table will be random rooftop obstacles and details. So imagine, if you will, the player characters are standing in one specific spot. You can use the random table to pick a 4-point direction and just say, so you can make a roll and go, okay, if you run forward, it's going to be a random roll, 27-meter drop. To your left is an angled roof, and to your right is a burnout, dilapidated building. And behind you is the roof angles upwards, so you'll have to scramble up the shingles or something like that. And so as they move across the rooftops, you can randomly roll depending on which directional they use: north, south, east, or west. You can decide what things they encounter, and of course where they came from has already been decided, so you can kind of make this strange, weird maze-like effect of deciding what kind of environment they're running or scrambling across, and use that in your game. So yeah, anyway, I'm DBJ, Dave Jackson. I am a contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing. Alex and Rob, who are make up the triumvirate of Critical Hit, and myself make up the triumvirate of Critical Hit Publishing, allowed me to express my brainchild, which is the cinematic environs. All those details can be found in the details. But yes, we are on Drive-Thru RPG. They come in PDF and Dead Tree forms, and you can find us on Facebook. Join the Critical Hit Publishing Facebook group if you want to. And I poke my head out into Absolute Tabletop and Critical Hit Publishing off times. I post to the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition group periodically, but it's there's a lot of people there, so there's a lot of noise, so it's very difficult to find me over there. But anyway, thank you for your attention. I hope this sparks some ideas to have some kind of city-based rooftop running element in your game if you would like to use it, especially for those more stealthy or quick games, and you could absolutely run them. I know Matt Click ran a game a long time ago called the Umbra Cloaks, and they were like, you didn't have to play a rogue, but you played someone who was part of like an assassins or a mercenary group. And since that point, it made me think about this. So hopefully, as we produce these books, Cityscapes will absolutely help someone if they want to use those elements when the book is released. It will be probably after Plains, Vast Plains, which is another release we're going to do. So anyway, thank you for joining me. For those who catch this later, thanks for watching. I hope this really sparks some ideas. And Drew Murray says, looking forward to watching this full video when it uploads and processes. Love your third pillar work. Thanks, dude. Yeah, it just it's a really niche kind of thing, but it's like my little passion project kind of. And I didn't want to let people in on something unless it was something that I enjoyed. And I think like the third pillar of gaming is really underutilized. Puzzles, layers, traps, and exploration, in my opinion, in gaming has always been separated, right? It hasn't been combined together. It's always found in different portions of a book. It's gotten different emphasis, and its emphasis has been placed in different areas. So even in our Dungeons and Dragons books, you have traps, but they don't tell you how to reskin those traps for a natural environment. And then they have layers for creatures, but they don't tell you how to lift up the layer from the creature and place it on another creature. So I was like, well, I'm just going to do it myself. So yeah, absolutely. So this is going to come to an end because I will ramble on and on. Most of my videos are 20 minutes or more, so it does take a lot of people's attention. So again, I am DBJ. Thanks for your attention. Have a very good day, and thanks for joining me on my Demi Daily deep dives. I say Demi Daily because it just gives me an opportunity to do this and gives me a way out if I'm not able to do this on a daily basis. Drew Murray says, I agree, man. There's bound to be a shift as the hobby grows the way it's doing. Yeah, I'm surprised. The sales pitch I gave to Alex and Rob when I ended up joining them at Critical Hit was about the cinematic environs. Was like, there's this book I want to do, and series of books, and they're not adventures, they're not class options, they're not more creatures. There's not new spells. It's just about doing the environment. And it took about 5 minutes to convince him, dude. And it was just like, oh, yeah, you can overlay this in anything. So that's really what I want to do. I like posting like the third pillar stuff. Hell, you go to Absolute Tabletop and do a search on the Facebook group and look up third pillar thoughts. I think I've got about 2 months worth of posts, something like that. So anyway, guys, thanks for your attention. I'm going to let this upload and let people watch this from the beginning. So I'm DBJ, your self-appointed third pillarist, and I'm out.